Free Speech Zone. Here's your host, Eric Barnard.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Free Speech Zone. I am your host, Eric Barnard. We are coming to you from the campus of Georgia Tech. I am honored to be joined today by the former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, General Phillip Breedlove. General Breedlove, thanks so much for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us today. This is a big honor. You're only our third guest, so congratulations.
Well, good luck to you all in your endeavors, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, want to do and this is a general discussion. This is just inquiring about. I'm not here to play got you journalism or ask you anything inappropriately, as we've talked off camera about. So this is going to be fun, I'm hoping.
Good.
So you spent how many years on active duty in the United States Air Force?
Yeah, so 39 years on active duty, 4 years here at Georgia Tech in the ROTC program, so 43 years in the uniform.
Wow, congratulations. And when you were here at Georgia Tech, what did you study and why did you join ROTC?
So I was a civil engineer. I remain a civil engineer. Now our school, number 2 in the nation, by the way, number 2 civil and environmental engineering school in the nation, really attracted to me because I thought structurally, I loved mechanical drawing, I loved surveying, et cetera, so it was a natural fit. I grew up always wanting to be a yellow jacket, but I really came here to try to, and I eventually did win a Air Force scholarship to get into the Air Force to fly airplanes. That's what I really wanted to do in life.
Wonderful, wonderful. What did you fly? Were you fighters, bombers?
So I started off the very first 2 years of my life washing right back into the program where I taught flying. So I came out of basic flying school, turned right back around and taught basic jet fighter or jet flying training for 2 years. And then after that, I went into the F-16. And off and on for about the next 26 years, I flew the F-16.
Wow, congratulations! So over that time, so obviously you served during what year did you go in?
So I was commissioned in 1977, but I actually went to pilot training in 78, graduated in 79.
79, started flying. So you were there for the Operation First Gulf War. You were there for the operations in Bosnia and Kosovo, and also for Afghanistan and Iraq. What's it like to be serving at a time when you go into war, and you've been in 3 wars?
I would tell you that the toughest part about serving during a time of conflict is you want to be that weapon and that tool. But most of these conflicts happen later in my life. My actual combat time was flown in Joint Forge, Joint Guardian in the former Yugoslav republics. During the rest of those wars and times, my biggest job as a commander was to prepare much younger people who were in my command to go forth and do what they were doing, and it was really tough to not get to be the simple tool, but to prepare those who are going forward and doing our nation's work.
Absolutely. What advice do you give to young military officers or people that are thinking about joining our military?
Well, you just asked 2 different questions. So for people who are thinking about joining the military, there's a lot of advice I give. I happen to believe in it. I have 3 children by marriage and birth and 2 sons-in-law by marriage. So I have basically 5 children. All 5 of them are associated with the military.
Wow.
3 of them wear the uniform, and 2 of them work directly for either a service or a combatant command. So I continue to offer to young folks that the career of a military person is not easy, but the advantage is there in so many ways if you want to take advantage of it. And I'd like to come back to that if you'll remind me in just a second.
Sure.
As far as advice to serving military men and women and officers, the first thing is to continue to thank them for their service. Remember, we're all voluntary force.
Absolutely.
Nobody's here because they have to be here. These people stepped up to a big task. And actually today, the numbers are debated, but it's not far off. less than 0.5% of Americans will ever raise their right hand and swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That's true.
Think about that.
That is incredible.
And so I thank them for that. And then there's a lot of advice I give. I can tell you to the senior guys, these days I'm asked to mentor our brand new 1-stars across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and I'm asked to mentor the new 3-stars across the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And the senior people, the very first piece of guidance I give them is that the family was before the military, the family is during the military, and the family is after the military. One of these organizations is temporary and the other one is not. A long way to say, keep your priorities where they need to be.
That's incredible advice.
So I want to come back to those advantages, and I just want to share a moment that I can authoritatively talk about, and that's me. The United States Air Force has given me everything I've ever had. I had a magnificent father and mother who provided for our family. But we were a blue-collar family. My father's formal education ended at the 5th grade.
Wow.
And so there wasn't a lot of money for going off to college.
Sure.
And the only way I was going to get through college was to get a scholarship. And as I told you, I wanted to fly. So I pursued the Air Force ROTC. I won an Air Force ROTC scholarship. And since then, literally, the Air Force has given me everything I've ever had. A civil engineering education here at Georgia Tech, an aeronautical engineering education, master's at Arizona State, an international affairs degree at National War College, probably the best military school in the world, and then a fellowship at MIT in international affairs. And so all the things that have prepared me for life or set me up for being the professional that I either am or not, depending on your opinion, the Air Force gave it to me. And I would just tell you that the opportunity to fly an F-16 for 2/3 of my adult life, that's not a bad thing either.
No, definitely not. And as a fellow Air Force veteran, I understand it's given me a lot. If I didn't have Air Force training, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I can assure you of that. But you talked about families and the importance of that. There's been a lot of words in the news about the issues with military housing, and the effects on families. What are your thoughts on
horrible
that whole mess?
Absolutely horrible. I was just out at Fort Polk maybe a month ago.
Fort Polk, where's that?
Louisiana.
Louisiana.
And we don't want to go into names there. We got a magnificent commander out there who I've known from the past. In fact, was a part of mentoring him through his 1-star course. We've got a great command team there working hard to take care of their people. But this privatized housing thing, this experiment that we launched off into in several years ago, more than several years ago, it has in some places and some ways really helped us in the housing business. But it has also gone horribly wrong in a couple of places. We have some of the housing owner teams that have the genuine interest of our young people at heart, and they're doing a relatively good job. And then we've got some horrible providers that are, I just think, extracting great wealth and leaving our young people holding the bag.
That's horrible.
And we need to bring great focus on this because it is the young people that are the most important part of our military. And I will just use a phrase that we use in the Air Force. You recruit an airman, but you retain a family.
Right.
And if we're not focused on supporting our family, we're going to be in trouble. And I think now, and I know for a fact that the commander at Fort Polk, he is all over this, and he's working it hard. But our commanders in the field are going to need help from Washington, D.C. to get this very big problem fixed.
Why are they handicapped? Why do they have to get this help from Washington? What are they handicapped from doing?
Well, this is bigger than any one installation. I mean, the installation commander can fight hard and advocate hard for his troops, but remember, these corporations bundle bases together. And I'll just oversimplify a complicated thing.
Sure.
But in order to entice one of the housing organizations to take over an effort, we typically had to give them a base where the housing was in great shape.
Sure.
And would be a moneymaker right off the bat. Housing that was in relatively good shape that would need some investment, but was in, could come along. And then sort of a problem base that needed a lot of work. And we bundled these things together so that they were a good commercial venture for an investor or a firm to take over. And so it's bigger than any one installation, because these installation commanders are dealing with a housing company that had 2 or 3 different bases that they're working with.
Sure.
And so it's not as simple as a one-on-one.
Right.
And what it's going to take is top-down leadership,
Sure.
Oversight, and some muscle to bring these less than genuine companies back in line.
No doubt about it. It's going to take a lot of work, and this is something that's going to take years to fix. The outgoing Secretary of the Air Force announced that the Air Force right now, she said that we are too small to do what we're being tasked to do. Do you think that the Air Force is too small, and are we being overextended?
She's exactly right. We are given mission, and we're too small for the mission. Either the mission has to change or the Air Force has to change. Here's some facts that I've heard our senior leaders use, and I think they're catchy and things you might remember. The Air Force today is smaller than any time in the history of the United States Air Force.
Wow.
It's smaller than the day it was born.
Really?
Smaller than the day it was born. We have less airplanes, and our airplanes are older. Think about this. Just in rough terms, when did the B-52 come into service?
I want to say back in the 60s.
Mid-50s.
50s.
Yeah, 52 is early 50s, but that was when it was being developed. But mid to late 50s, it comes into service.
Wow.
I have heard the Chief of Staff of the Air Force use this phrase: the mother of the last pilot to fly the B-52 hasn't been born yet. So by the time the B-52 goes out of service, it's going to be nearly 100 years old as a weapons system. Now, none of those airplanes are 100 years old. We've had some retire and this, that, and the other.
Of course.
But the weapons system is going to be nearly 100 years old when it retires. So the average age of our fleet, when did the F-16 come into service? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. I'm 39 years in the military, and I've been flying it since almost the beginning of my military career.
Right.
So our Air Force now is older in terms of age of our fleet, and smaller in terms of number of men and women involved and aircraft involved than it's ever been. But the tasks really haven't changed as our Air Force has been downsized over time.
So, and you said so either the mission's got to change, or we're going to have to increase the size of the age of the fleet and get more people in. Let's
increase the size of the force and decrease the age of the fleet.
There you go. Thank you. Let's talk about the mission right now. What do you think we should do now with operations in Iraq and Afghanistan still going on? Is it time we turn the corner and say, hey, we've done our job, we need to leave?
I'll give you a flat no to that really quickly, and then let's talk about it.
Sure.
So how long have we been in Korea?
Since the 1940s.
50s, yeah, permanently, yeah.
Yeah.
So how long have we been in Germany?
Since World War II.
Yeah. So we seem to be in a real hurry to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I, too, believe that we need to look at the mission and determine, are we sized right and are we doing the right thing?
Right.
But think about how long we've invested to keep things right on the European landmass. and how long we've invested to keep things right on the Korean Peninsula. Do we need to take the same approach to Afghanistan, a country that might actually come out from under its problems? I don't know. I don't want to overstate this, but I think that there's a lot of voices out there that say, get out and get out now.
There are.
And if we do that, do we expect success to follow?
Sure.
Ask more often. How often does somebody in your position get to talk to the president?
Well, so you're not going to do a lot of talking to the president unless you are a chief of staff of a service,
Okay.
or a combatant commander. There are a few others that do it, but the places that you come in, and I forgot to, of course, mention the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or the vice chairman. So the people that typically are exposed to and deal with the president are the top two of the joint service, the joint commanders. The combatant commanders that are out there that, like I was a combatant commander as the U.S. European Command Commander, which is then double-hatted as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Or, again, if you're service chiefs. So the only experience I can talk to you from is my time as a combatant commander.
Okay.
And
just refresh my memory. What years are we talking
so
about
this
here?
is 2013 to 2016.
20. Okay, fair enough.
So when you are a service chief, or first of all, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, they're going to come into the contact with the president a lot. Certainly not daily, but weekly or bi-weekly. They're going to bump into the president.
And are you guys? Is it a purely, what's going on over there, General? Kind of conversation?
No, not at all. For those guys, they're typically seeing the president when they're going over for a principals committee meeting or a national security staff meeting. And the same then goes for the next level. The chiefs of the services, the four services, they probably then bump into the president the next most often. And again, it's associated with decision making in the White House.
So you didn't get really interact with a lot of like civilian officials, Secretary of Defense, that sort of thing.
Oh, all the time.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it sounds like that's a little bit more frequent than interacting with the president.
That's
per se.
exactly right. So the combatant commanders, the third of that echelon, probably bump into the president less than others. I would say that I had 6 or 7 personal interactions with the president in my 3 years. But the combatant commanders and the service chiefs, and of course the chairman and the vice chairman, contact with the Secretary of Defense was often.
Fair enough. So my next question has a couple of parts to it. So I'm going to start by taking off on this. I know you don't want to like name names or call anybody out or anything. So I'm asking this more in like the abstract sense. What is it that makes you respect somebody who's in the position of Secretary of Defense? Like what kind of qualities do they have to bring to the table for you to go, that's the guy I want to work with? As opposed to, please don't let him call me today.
Okay, let's back up one step and make sure that we get one point across. One of the things that sets our country apart from many countries in this world is that our military understands and adheres to civilian control of the military. As a 2-star general, I was once in a nation that will go unnamed.
Okay.
And we were going through an election here in the United States that was pretty divisive. And the leader of a country that I was visiting asked me, General Breedlove, what are you going to do if the wrong president gets elected? And
Interesting.
I talked to him and answered him in the following way, and I would answer you in the following way. That in the United States military, we don't swear to support and defend anything to any person. I don't swear to a president.
Right, you don't
I
protect the
don't
president, so to
swear
speak.
to a Secretary of Defense. What I do is I swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. But it is that Constitution and the laws of our country that tell me that the president is the commander, and for a combatant commander, which I was, the next person in the chain of command was the Secretary of Defense, and then it was me. So I only had two bosses, SecDef and the president. Now, we all treated the chairman with certain deference. In fact, I treated him like he was in my chain of command, even though the chain of command was president, SecDef, COCOM. So you just asked me about respect for the secretary. The first thing that I would say is, this is an important question, but the first question is, or the first answer is, whether I respect them or not, the Secretary of Defense was my boss.
Right.
Whether I respect him or not, the president is his boss and my boss. So we have a great tradition in America. We know what that means.
I guess having grown up in America, I forget that there are other countries where people, it just doesn't quite make sense.
They don't like the
What
guy
are you gonna do
elected,
with
we
it?
have a coup and we have another election.
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't have that issue. So that's the first principal answer. The second principal answer, all the things that you could guess, a man of integrity, a man of intelligence, a man that has served and understands, a person that understands what servant leadership is, an individual that looks down as well as up when he leads. Those are all things I respect.
Fair enough. Would you say those are the same qualities you look for in fellow generals?
Absolutely.
Is there any difference in what you look for in somebody who's in a civilian job versus somebody who's in a military job? Does it take different personality traits to be successful at those two different things?
Well, let's back up and hit one more first principle thing.
Okay.
The civilians in these jobs are politically appointed. So they have a different set of things that they deal with.
Right.
We in the military have a great freedom in that we are military.
Right, you
And
don't
we
lose your
should-
job because you said something wrong in an interview. You might get yelled at, but...
Well, you could lose your job. It happened, right? Remember the Rolling Stone article?
Oh, well, okay, yeah.
So you could
I guess I would
lose-
say it's easier for
Yeah.
a political appointee.
Yeah, so political folks who come to their job through political processes have a different set of baggages that they have to manage. In the military, the beauty of the matter is that we should be hired on our competence, and we should be hired in a meritocracy that allows those who are capable to rise. And when we get there, we have allegiance to that Constitution, to our mission, and as I just told you, we have allegiance to the people below us who do the real work. And so we enjoy a little bit of freedom that maybe our political masters don't.
Their hands are a little more tied. What would you say is the biggest specific adventure you had the opportunity to go on? Like, where did you go? What mission did you participate in that you felt like was the most deeply affecting experience?
It wasn't actually a mission. It was my first major command. So I had, as others do, small little tactical commands. I was a flight commander, this, that, and the other. But in the Air Force, unlike the Army where they have very distinct commands much earlier, in the Air Force, for an aviator, not for other people, security forces, maintenance officers, they have very early commands. But for an aviator, typically your first real quote-unquote command is squadron command. And I would tell you that probably the most memorable and forming event, the event that shaped me the most in my career was my first squadron command of the 80th Fighter Squadron in a remote location at Kunsan Air Base. In my squadron, about 333 or so people, not big by Army standards, but big by Air Force standards. 28 airplanes, 333 people, and a mission that we could see straight north of us in Korea. That was probably, to me, the most formative thing that, and frankly, one of the most fun things I ever did.
Lots of flying F-16s, I suppose.
Well, at Squadron Command is the first time where you're really about making sure that your squadron is good, not so much you.
Fair enough.
You still want to be the ace of the base because you want the young people looking up to you. But your job is really to make sure that those 28 airplanes and 333 people take the fight north if they have to.
Fair enough. I wanted to change tack a little bit because we're kind of coming to the end here. You said something when you were talking with Eric that I wanted to bring up. You said only 0.5% of the American population will ever raise their right hand and swear to defend the Constitution. I wanted to ask you what you think the cultural ramifications of that
It's tough
are.
and it's worrisome. God bless our Army, Air Force, National Guard, and our reserve forces in the all four services who remain out there in the population and keep us in contact. As the size of the U.S. force gets so small compared to our population, men and women are losing contact with us. I mean, if you think back during World War II, maybe even Vietnam, every family had either a first level contact with somebody in service or at most somebody in their family. But very few were completely disconnected from the military. As our military has gotten so small in relation to our population, now there are so many people out there that absolutely have no idea about the military. The good news is, right now, we enjoy, I think, great support from people in this country. And I hope that we shepherd that support and keep it and stand up to their standards and keep their faith so that we don't lose them. But simply the fact that we are so small, we are now not connected like we used to be. And that's why I again said one of the greatest tools of keeping us connected to the American public is our National Guard troops who live out there in these. We have states now with no Air Force bases in them. You know, there's always been states with no naval bases in them. But, you know, the bottom line is we are smaller, getting smaller every day, and we could lose contact with America if we're not careful.
Fair enough. Now, on the other hand, many people complain that the United States military spends too much money, even though, as you said, it is getting smaller. What exactly is going on? And part B to that question would be, you described a situation in the privatized housing for soldiers, where it attracts certain, let's say, less than moral operators who mostly just want to extract money. Would you say that goes on with other projects as well? With other contractors that the military works with? Is that the reason why it spends a lot of money?
So remind me of that, and let me answer the first one first and get it answered correctly, and then we'll go back to the
that was like 5
second
questions in a row there.
So the first question is about spending writ large. So have you ever heard the ounce of prevention, ounce of medicine for...
Yeah, I can't
remember that
right now,
whole
but I remember what it means.
So the bottom line is, the way I'd like to say it is far, 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 may I say far, 8 or 9 more times, less expensive to spend and prevent and avoid a war than it is to fight a war.
Right.
What we spend every day now is a drop in the bucket of what World War II would cost us today.
Right.
Do you know how many people died in World War II?
I know the total number worldwide. I don't know how many Americans died.
No, total worldwide. What's the number you use?
120 million?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the right one, but it's close, really close. You know,
but I mean that's including like all the camps and Hitler's whole thing and the stuff that was going on in Russia at the time.
And it destroyed the world economy. So, would you rather now spend 4.1% of our GDP to avoid that, or do you just want to tra-la-la back into one of those things?
Fair enough.
And we have been saying for nearly 20 years, since the wall fell, maybe 30 years, that, you know, some people use the phrase, history is over. Let me tell you, history's not over. Russia invaded Ukraine twice in the last 4 years. Well, not 4 years, 5 years now. History's not over. And if we decide that we can't spend to avoid war, then we'll get to enjoy another war, and we'll see how penny-wise and pound-foolish we were. So,
but if it is the case that we are indeed pursuing that policy of prevention, why is it that the military keeps getting smaller?
well, we are more expensive, aren't we? If we had a draft where we forced people in and then we let them go and brought more in, that's a big difference than what we have today, which I believe is right, by the way. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
The professional service is absolutely the way to go. We want to bring, think about this. If you had to every 2 or 3 years train a whole batch of new jet mechanics for all of the aircraft that the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines fly, how cost effective is that? I'd rather bring in a young man or a woman, train her to be a jet engine mechanic, and keep them for 12 or 13 years rather than every 3 years having to retrain them again. So I believe the professional force on all manner of levels is the right way to go. But it's going to be a more expensive force, isn't it? If all you ever do is bring in E1s and release E3s, bring in O1s and release O3s, you're going to have a force that is very young and turns over a lot, maybe cheaper. But if you bring in brilliant young privates, airmen, and you train them and retain them, and then get your return on investment on them, it's a good thing in the long run, but it's more expensive to have a professional force. And so, yes, if we're going to run on the budgets of conscription, professional forces are going to be tough.
All right, fair enough. Well, that I have more questions, but I know you have a very strict time limit, so I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a close. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's all good.
Absolute honor to speak with you, General.